Could you imagine a single event in America's history that claimed more lives than all other American wars combined? Picture an era when brother fought against brother, when the very fabric of a young nation was soaked in blood. It's a tale of courage, horror, and a staggering death toll that eclipses any other in the annals of American warfare. A brutal, gruesome testament to the cost of freedom and unity. That's right, we're diving into the bloody waters of the American Civil War. It all began with a rift, a division fueled by the contentious issue of slavery. In the mid-19th century, the United States was a nation at odds with itself. The North and South were two regions with starkly different economies, societies, and ideologies. In the North, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Factories and mills dotted the landscape, and the economy was fueled by industry and trade. The North believed in a free labor system, where a man could rise or fall based on his own hard work. Slavery, they argued, was not only morally wrong, but also economically backward. Contrast this with the South, where the economy was based on agriculture, specifically the cultivation of cotton, tobacco, and rice. These were labor-intensive crops, and the plantation owners relied heavily on the labor of enslaved Africans. The South saw slavery as a necessary evil, integral to their way of life and their economy. The political landscape was equally divided. The North, with its burgeoning cities and industries, wanted protective tariffs and federal funding for infrastructure. The South, on the other hand, championed states' rights and was vehemently against any federal interference in their affairs, particularly with regards to slavery. As the nation expanded westward, the question of whether these new territories would be free or slave states became a flashpoint. The Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act were attempts to keep the peace, but they only served to fan the flames of tension. Then came the Dred Scott decision in 1857, where the Supreme Court ruled that Congress could not prohibit slavery in the territories, further inflaming the North. The stage was set for a conflict that had been brewing for decades. And so, with the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, a man who was firmly against the expansion of slavery, the Southern states decided they had had enough. It was a decision that would plunge the nation into the bloodiest conflict it had ever seen. The spark that ignited the war was the attack on Fort Sumter, a momentous event that would go down in history, setting the stage for a conflict that would shape the United States. The year was 1861, and tensions between the North and South had reached a boiling point. Fort Sumter, an imposing sea fort located in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, was the setting for the first act of this bloody drama. Confederate forces, emboldened by the secessionist fervor, laid siege to the fort, which was held by Union soldiers. After a day and a half of relentless bombardment, the Union was forced to surrender. The first shots of the Civil War had been fired, and a nation was irrevocably divided. The early battles of the war were characterized by a grim determination on both sides. Young men, many barely out of their teens, marched to war with high spirits, believing in the justness of their cause. The First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas, was a harsh awakening for both sides. This battle, fought in the summer of 1861, was the first major land battle of the Civil War. The Union and Confederate armies clashed near Manassas Junction in Virginia, with both sides expecting a swift and decisive victory. However, the battle turned into a chaotic and bloody affair, with the Confederates eventually gaining the upper hand. The Union forces, unprepared for the ferocity of the fighting, were forced to retreat in disorder. The Battle of Bull Run was a moment of harsh realization for both sides. The war would not be won or lost in a single battle. It would be a long, grueling conflict marked by unimaginable bloodshed and suffering. The war was just beginning, and the worst was yet to come. The early battles were a mere prelude to the horror and devastation that the Civil War would bring. A nation was at war with itself, and the future was uncertain. The war waged on, marked by key battles and turning points that would shape the course of history. As the Civil War raged across the American landscape, certain key events would not only determine the outcome of this conflict, but also define the very essence of the nation. Let's take a journey back to September 17, 1862, to the banks of Antietam Creek. This day would witness the Battle of Antietam, the single bloodiest day in American military history. Union and Confederate forces clashed ferociously, with neither side giving an inch. The result, a staggering 23,000 casualties in just one day. This brutal confrontation didn't decisively end in anyone's favor, but it did give President Abraham Lincoln the confidence he needed for a monumental decision. Fast forward a few weeks to January 1, 1863. This day marked a turning point not just in the war, but in the struggle for human rights. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a historic decree that declared all persons held as slaves within any state in rebellion against the United States shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. This wasn't just a military strategy. It was a moral stand against the horrors of slavery, forever altering the character and purpose of the war. Now, let's move to a little Pennsylvania town called Gettysburg. Over 3 hot summer days in July 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg raged. It was a battle that would prove to be a significant turning point in the war. Confederate General Robert E. Lee's second invasion of the North ended in a crushing defeat, with the Union forces under General George G. Meade successfully holding their ground. The loss was a severe blow to the Confederacy, both in terms of strategic advantage and morale. The battle resulted in an estimated 51,000 casualties, a grim testament to the ferocity of the conflict. The Battle of Gettysburg, however, also set the stage for one of the most iconic speeches in American history. A few months later, in November 1863, President Lincoln would stand on that same battlefield to deliver the Gettysburg Address. In just over 2 minutes, Lincoln honored the fallen, reaffirmed the purpose of the Union cause, and provided a vision for the nation's future. That government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. From the blood-soaked fields of Antietam to the proclamation that shook the foundations of a nation, from the decisive battle in a small Pennsylvania town to a speech that continues to echo through the ages, these events were more than just battles and turning points in a war. They were pivotal moments in the evolution of the American nation. These battles were not just about territory or strategic advantage, they were about principles, about the very ideals that the United States was built upon. The Civil War was a crucible, a fiery trial that tested and ultimately strengthened the character of a nation. These key battles and turning points were the moments that defined that trial. They were the moments when the nation decided who it was and what it stood for. They were the moments when the United States, in the midst of its darkest hour, chose to fight for the principles of freedom and equality. These battles and events would shape the course of the war and leave an indelible mark on American history. They would define a nation, shape its character, and set the course for its future. The echoes of these battles still resonate today, a reminder of the sacrifices made and the principles fought for. They are a testament to the indomitable spirit of the American people and their unyielding belief in the ideals of freedom and equality. Finally, after 4 long, bloody years, the war ended with the surrender of General Lee at Appomattox Courthouse. The year was 1865, and the weary nation sighed with relief as the Civil War drew to a close. The South was ravaged, its spirit and economy shattered, while the North, though victorious, bore the deep scars of a nation torn apart. The surrender at Appomattox wasn't a grand affair, it was a somber moment, marked by the simple act of General Robert E. Lee handing over his sword to Union General Ulysses S. Grant. This simple act signified the end of the Confederacy, the end of the bloodshed, and the beginning of a long journey towards healing. But as the country was just beginning to stitch its wounds, an unthinkable tragedy struck. The man who had led the nation through its darkest hour, President Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated. It was a mere 5 days after the surrender at Appomattox when John Wilkes Booth, a Southern sympathizer, took the life of the 16th president at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The news of Lincoln's death sent shockwaves across the nation. The man who had preserved the Union and abolished slavery was no more. His vision for malice towards none and charity for all was left in the hands of a grieving nation, now tasked with not only rebuilding but also fulfilling the promises of equality and freedom Lincoln had championed. The assassination of Lincoln was a brutal reminder that the end of the war did not mean the end of the hatred and division that had caused it. It was a grim testament to the reality that the path to true unity and peace was still fraught with challenges. The nation had survived the war, but the struggle was far from over. The scars were deep, the losses immense, but the spirit of the nation, though battered, was not broken. The journey to heal and rebuild had only just begun. But the end of the war did not mean the end of strife for the nation. The war was over, but the battle for equality and justice was just beginning. The end of the Civil War marked a new beginning for the United States. The once divided nation was now on a path of restoration, a period known as the Reconstruction era. This phase, spanning from 1865 to 1877, was a time of significant challenges, but also one of profound successes. The aftermath of the war was a tableau of destruction. Cities lay in ruins, the economy was in shambles, and countless lives had been lost. The southern states, in particular, were left decimated, their lands scarred by the relentless battles and their societies in disarray. It was a daunting task to rebuild from such devastation. But the physical destruction was only a fraction of the problem. The societal fabric that once held the nation together was frayed. The abolition of slavery, a fundamental cause of the war, had left 4 million African Americans free but destitute. The promise of equality was a beacon of hope, yet the path towards it was fraught with obstacles. During the Reconstruction era, significant strides were made to rebuild the nation and to integrate African Americans into society. The Reconstruction Amendments, namely the 13th, 14th, and 15th, were ratified, outlawing slavery, granting citizenship to all born or naturalized in the United States, and securing voting rights for African American men. These were monumental achievements, yet they faced fierce resistance. The rise of groups like the Ku Klux Klan and the implementation of black codes and Jim Crow laws in southern states exemplified the backlash against the advancements of African Americans. The struggle for racial justice was far from over. The Reconstruction era was also marked by a political tug-of-war. The radical Republicans who controlled Congress clashed with President Andrew Johnson over the direction of the Reconstruction. This discord culminated in Johnson's impeachment, though he narrowly avoided removal from office. The political turmoil added another layer of complexity to the nation's healing process. Despite the immense challenges, the Reconstruction era was a turning point for the United States. It was a time of transformation, a time when the nation was forced to confront its past and chart a new course for the future. The foundations for civil rights movements were laid, and the seeds of modern America were sown. The era was not without its failures. The promises of the Reconstruction often fell short, and the battle for racial equality would continue for decades. Yet, the period was instrumental in shaping the nation's trajectory, setting it on a path towards a more inclusive society. The Civil War left a legacy that continues to shape America to this day. The scars of the war may have faded, but the echoes of the Reconstruction era still reverberate in today's America. The struggle for equality, the fight for justice, and the spirit of resilience instilled during this period continue to be an integral part of the American story. The Civil War was not just a chapter in history, it was a bloody, brutal saga that continues to haunt America. This conflict, steeped in the blood of more than 600,000 souls, left a lasting imprint on the nation's consciousness, shaping its social, political, and cultural landscape. The echoes of the war can be heard even today, reverberating through the halls of power and the streets of cities across the country. The war did not merely end, it evolved, manifesting in the form of social upheaval, racial tension, and political discord. The Emancipation Proclamation, a beacon of hope amidst the carnage, promised freedom, but delivered a fractured society. The chains of slavery were broken, but the shackles of prejudice and inequality proved harder to shatter. The Reconstruction era was a testament to this struggle, a period marked by progress and regression, hope and despair. The promise of equal rights remained elusive with the rise of Jim Crow laws, the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, and the entrenchment of systemic racism. Politically, the war redefined the balance of power between the states and the federal government. The concept of states' rights, a contentious issue that fueled the war, was fundamentally altered. The federal government emerged stronger, its authority unequivocally established. Culturally, the war was a crucible that forged American identity. It gave birth to a narrative of sacrifice, resilience, and redemption that continues to permeate American literature, art, and popular culture. From the mournful strains of the battle hymn of the Republic to the poignant prose of Walt Whitman, the Civil War has seeped into the very fabric of America's cultural consciousness. In essence, the Civil War was more than a battle between the North and the South. It was a war of ideas, a clash of ideologies that continues to shape the contours of American society. Its bloody legacy is a stark reminder of the profound impact of historical events on the present and the future. The Civil War was a brutal reminder of the cost of division and the price of freedom. So we've traveled through the blood-soaked battlefields of the Civil War, but what does it all mean for us today? We've journeyed through the tumultuous prelude to war, where tensions simmered and ultimately boiled over. We've seen the first shots fired, heralding the beginning of a conflict that would engulf a nation. We've marched alongside soldiers in pivotal battles, witnessing pivotal moments that defined the course of the war. We've mourned the loss of a leader and celebrated the end of a brutal conflict. We've grappled with the aftermath and the arduous task of reconstruction, and we've confronted the bloody legacy left in the wake of this monumental event in American history. The Civil War was not just a war of armies, but also a war of ideas and ideals. It was a brutal, bloody conflict, yes, but it was also a crucible in which the identity of a nation was forged. The war tested the resolve of a people and their commitment to the principles of freedom and equality. It was a war that asked in the most profound way possible what it meant to be an American. The Civil War is a testament to the fact that history is not a series of isolated events, but a web of interconnected moments that shape and inform each other. The war and its aftermath didn't just end in 1865. The echoes of the conflict reverberate even today in our laws, our culture, our politics, and our collective consciousness. The Civil War was a dark and bloody chapter in our history, but it was also an essential part of our journey as a nation. It tested our resolve, challenged our ideals, and ultimately made us stronger. It forced us to confront the contradictions within our own society and to strive towards a more perfect union. In the end, the Civil War serves as a stark reminder of the price we sometimes have to pay for progress. It's a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who came before us, of the blood spilled in the name of freedom and equality. But it's also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to our capacity for courage, for change, for growth. As we look back on the Civil War, let us not simply remember the battles and the bloodshed. Let us also remember the ideals that were fought for, the principles that were defended, and the progress that was achieved. Let us remember and let us learn. The Civil War serves as a stark reminder of our history, a history that continues to shape and inform our present and our future.